Great to be here. Thank you so much for including me. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Alison Shaw, and I've been kind of thinking about how to accelerate climate action with and for communities for quite a long time, with a few people on the call today, namely Stuart Cohen, going way back decades thinking about some of these things. And so I'm interested in kind of sharing a rollicking journey with you about low carbon resilience and ACT's Natural Solutions Initiative, because both low carbon resilience and the Natural Solutions Initiative that ACT is mobilizing right now are two strategic and systemic frameworks for climate action at the community scale, and they kind of dovetail and interact with one another. So I just want to take you on a bit of a rollicking journey. Some of you will be familiar with some of this, but hopefully there'll be new material as well. So a low carbon resilience approach is a leap toward climate ready and sustainable communities. And I'd like to kind of show you how that is. But first of all, just want to pull back a little bit and talk about the international science and situate us within that. The sixth assessment report last year actually told us that the climate science that we were using previously was rather conservative, and actually the risks of global warming and climate impacts are accelerating, and that the risks are now being assessed to occur higher at lower global warming levels. So what that means is that, you know, the climate science that we've been using is understating the types of impacts and hazards that we're going to be experiencing. And there's particularly high risk adverse consequences for unique and threatened systems and for extreme weather. And so this poses significant challenges for our communities that are on the front line of action. But many options exist. We know that through mitigation science and efforts that there's lots of cost-effective ways that communities are able to reduce their emissions and aim towards zero emissions targets, including integrating solar and wind, increasing building performance, and increasing efficiencies in transportation and mobility. And many communities are doing a lot of these things. But we also have been shown in the latest IPCC report that the highest impact areas are in the renewable energy transition, as well as in nature-based solutions. So reducing conversion of forests and ecosystems, sequestering carbon, and restoring ecosystems. And so these nature-based solutions are a significant way that we can address and tackle climate change. Communities are leading. They're on the front lines of climate impacts, many multi-hazard impacts ranging from flood and wildfire, drought, and heat events. And so it's really important that we're addressing adaptation in our communities, but also not forgetting that the communities are also the sources of emissions. So we need to be driving down the impacts of climate change by addressing the source as well. So communities are actively thinking about these things and addressing multiple challenges relating to reducing emissions in transportation, in buildings and land use, actively decarbonizing energy systems, anticipating and responding to projected climate risks, limiting exposure and adapting infrastructure, protecting and restoring ecosystems, and addressing vulnerability, health, safety, equity, and justice at the same time, while also now starting to think about how the minimizing conversion of natural areas actually can not only amplify net zero emissions goals, but also help to buffer against some of the impacts of climate change, such as heat and flood. And so this kind of the multiple challenges that local governments and communities face right now requires more systemic thinking about climate action and different climate action approaches. And low carbon resilience, we're mobilizing as a step change in climate action that coordinates and mainstreams adaptation, mitigation, equity, and sustainability co-benefits in planning and decision processes. And the reason for this is because we understand now that the way that communities have been developed is unsustainable and actually very emissions intensive, and also placing communities in higher and higher exposed areas to risk. In addition, we need to be thinking about strategic technologies and strategies that help us reduce our emissions, but do so in a way that ensures that we're thinking over time and building resilience into those initiatives and strategies over time. We need to be thinking about adaptation approaches that don't exacerbate emissions and climate change, but actually both lower risk and lower emissions. And so we're in a position right now where we need to be thinking systemically about how these things interact, not only emissions reduction and risk, but also how climate action can be used as a window of opportunity to advance toward more sustainable communities. And so we need to be thinking more strategically about the co-benefits of all of the actions that we make, and recognizing that climate action doesn't exist in a vacuum. It needs to be extended and embedded into all areas of work, recognizing that we need to be building more social, environmental, and economic kind of co-benefits into the work that we're doing, so that we're promoting actions that multi-solve or multitask, and that, you know, we're building solutions both recognizing risk and emissions that have longer term sustainability benefits. So at ACT, we have been building resources as we're processing lots of literature and scholarship and best practice in the gray literature. We're aiming to build resources that can be used by communities to advance these types of ideas. And so this particular resource is on the co-benefits of low carbon resilience planning, and aims to help decision makers think more systemically about climate risk, emissions, equity, and other sustainability goals. So we've applied this concept of low carbon resilience in 10 different partner communities across the province. And the goal was really to embed risk, emissions, and sustainability into decision processes, building on or piggybacking on where communities were at in their decision-making and or planning processes. And so we aimed to introduce low carbon resilience into community planning, asset management, corporate strategy, procurement, business prioritization. So one of the things that we found from this process is that there were immense benefits to mainstreaming these systemic criteria into decision processes. So for instance, in Summerland's business prioritization, we embedded criteria around reducing climate risk. So immediately getting the proponent to think about climate projections and how they impact the work that they're proposing, as well as reducing emissions. So does your project actually increase emissions, or will it help achieve net zero goals? And then really encouraging systemic thinking about co-benefits of particular projects and how they either support or hinder the community. So we have a resource around this piece of work as well, called the Low Carbon Resilience Decision Tool for Local Government, which is just the benefits and mostly the benefits, not so much the trade-offs, which we're still working on, of embedding this type of criteria into decision processes. And another really strategic pathway, let's say, that came out of embedding low carbon resilience into these diverse communities was streamlining climate action planning and ensuring that the city of Port Moody, who we were working with, who was charged with building a sustainability plan, an adaptation plan, and a mitigation plan, didn't spend their limited resources on three planning processes, but instead integrated them in a way that made sense for the community. And in doing so, we worked with Port Moody and some consultants at Pinna Sustainability to build an inclusive, equitable process, striking a cross-departmental team to evaluate climate projections for the community, better understand areas of risk and key areas of vulnerability, and to co-evaluate opportunities for emissions reduction based on emissions inventory and forecasting. And by doing so, the entire senior leadership of the organization was brought in to discuss low carbon resilience opportunities, key ways to use this data in order to build higher, more systemic strategies for the communities to advance on climate change. And one of the outcomes of this type of work has been building shared responsibility across the senior leadership team, across different disciplines, different areas, and different mandates, as well as using low carbon resilience criteria in their onboarding of new personnel as well at the city. So we've outlined some of the processes associated with low carbon resilience planning in this planning handbook that can be found on our website. And some of the results from this type of work relate to just really embedding climate action into everything that the corporation does. So embedding risk, emissions, equity, and co-benefits into all city plans and processes. The way that this has been built out in implementation has led to an extreme weather response plan, looking at adaptation opportunities that don't increase emissions or inequity, a climate-ready buildings plan that's looking at ways to reduce risk in buildings as well as emissions, and nature-based solutions planning that actually looks at how to introduce natural asset management into asset management and how it connects to green infrastructure standards. So these are some of the ways that LCR has played out in Port Moody. And that last piece with Port Moody is what we're currently working on in the third phase of implementation. So we're working with Port Moody now 6-7 years later, still testing out these ideas and moving them further and further into the guts of the institution, I like to say. And so right now we're working with them on nature-based solutions planning. We all probably are familiar with the United Nations Environment Assembly's definition that's been approved and adopted by 196 UN member states, which really is quite systemic in nature about nature-based solutions from across the gamut of natural to hybrid to engineered that address multiple social, economic, and environmental challenges for human well-being as well as ecosystem well-being. And so we really see nature-based solutions as a low carbon resilient strategy, primarily because we know on this call that it helps to avoid certain risks that we're going to see more of, like flood risk, like our previous presenter outlined, and heat risks. We know that nature-based solutions help to sequester carbon, can help to avoid costs in expanded infrastructure over time, promote health and well-being, and promote healthy ecosystems, as well as providing green resilient infrastructure over time that generally is more cost effective. So this is, there's some good news and there's some bad news. The good news is that nature-based solutions are growing exponentially, are happening all over the world, are being implemented by governments and the private sector alike, that there's financing being associated with nature-based solutions, both in our nation as well as through private funders. So this is the good news. It's happening fast. People are interested. They see the value. The not so good news is that nature-based solutions are happening quickly and in very kind of disconnected ways. And this is largely because different disciplines call nature-based solutions different things, like natural infrastructure or low impact development, or nature-based solutions or natural assets or green infrastructure. The nomenclature is disconnected across different disciplines. And so are the approaches then. Nature-based solutions in the literature and scholarship that we've been reviewing the past number of years is rather ad hoc and project-based. So rarely is it integrated into the ecological systems that it's intended to promote. Largely, nature-based solutions are being used for the ecosystem services they provide to humans and our communities, and less focused on the ecosystem processes that underlie them. There are narrow and singular focused applications of nature-based solutions. So many nature-based solutions, unlike Charlotte's nature-based solutions nature-based solution that we just heard from, are singular focused in their application. And so there's an opportunity to really think about how to optimize nature-based solutions across different challenge areas. So these are the challenges that kind of frame up ACT's Natural Solutions Initiative, which we're starting to build out with Port Moody and other community partners and different watershed partners as well. So the goal of our Natural Solutions Initiative is to build coherence in the nomenclature and in the various approaches. So based on a significant review of the scholarship and the best practice in nature-based solutions, we've identified 3 primary approaches that seem to be nested within each other: ecosystem-based management at the watershed scale, primarily natural asset management focused mostly at the community scale, and blue-green infrastructure, which is primarily focused at the neighborhood and site scales. And these look at different aspects of nature-based solutions, ranging from natural assets all the way to engineered assets. And so just capturing kind of some nomenclature around the 3 primary and nested approaches helps us build cohesion across various scales of nature-based solutions action, ranging from watershed, which emphasizes those underlying ecological processes, water, air, biodiversity, ecosystem services that we depend on, and the community scale, which protects and restores the various natural assets that are already available within the community; neighborhood scale, which emphasizes protection, restoration, as well as hybrid or engineered solutions, ranging from street trees to green roofs and community gardens, to parcel scale, which tend to be engineered solutions. We also want to overcome the singular focus of nature-based solutions, either as a solution for flood risk or for biodiversity or for climate resilience or for equity building. So we have identified 5 key objectives that NBS is being used for in the scholarship. And are suggesting that, to the best of our ability, we start thinking more systemically about our nature-based solutions projects and how they can actually advance some of these objectives. The first being centering Indigenous knowledge and leadership, promoting biodiversity, embedding climate action, both risk and emissions, enabling sustainable service delivery, so that natural infrastructure component, and supporting health, equity, and justice moving forward. And so ACT's Natural Solutions Initiative is really trying to build a coherent and systemic framework for nature-based solutions that can be mobilized and build and advance upon one another. And so this matrix, this cube diagram we call it, is the framework that we're essentially building out with best practice in the scholarship, and trying to translate that best practice into action with our partner communities. The underlying ethos of the Natural Solutions Initiative is to center Indigenous knowledges and leadership at the watershed scale, at the territorial level. This is an area that doesn't currently have colonial jurisdiction within British Columbia in particular, and therefore presents a great opportunity for meaningful engagement with Indigenous knowledge and leadership at the scale. So we have an underlying summary of this framework that we're putting forward through the Natural Solutions Initiative Summary Report. What this looks like in practice to date with the City of Port Moody is building on the city's goal from its climate action plan, its low carbon resilience plan. We've actually supported their work in natural asset management, creating an inventory with $377 million worth of valued natural assets. The next stage is to connect that natural asset management work to the green infrastructure strategy, and connecting those two approaches to the overall watershed scale, and connecting the work that Metro Van is doing at the watershed scale with this particular work in Port Moody. So we've been building out a few resources that may be of interest to people on the call, just around regulatory mechanisms toolkit, how to support nature-based solutions at these various scales of activity, and the types of policies and mechanisms that can be used, and a multi-benefit indicators tool showcasing indicators for some of the co-benefits that we hope that people that are entering this nature-based solution space will apply within their projects. So key outcomes of this low carbon resilient approach and nature-based solutions as a low carbon resilient strategy is that it's building systems-based awareness, overcoming silos in disciplines and mandates, catalyzing innovative management practices, sharing cross-departmental responsibility for implementation, and saving time and money in planning and in disaster risk over the long term, hopefully. Expanding opportunities for funding, looking for funding for climate action can be very siloed. This type of approach can allow health funding to interact with climate action, disaster risk funding, other areas of funding. The goal is to accelerate progress on sustainability indicators and to advance nature-based solutions as a critical strategy. So as many of you have heard me say, climate change is not an environmental challenge, it's a social design challenge. helping communities move from typical 20th, well, one could say 19th century development to 21st century development pathways is an important undertaking. We need to bandy together, specifically at the subnational scale now, as our climate, our political climates are starting to change. So I just wanted to end with the fact that SFU and SFU Climate Innovation is taking seriously community-centered climate approaches and is aiming to meet this urgent challenge of working together at this scale in order to overcome silos in disciplines and sectors, really bringing communities into research processes in order to advance best practice and start communicating that best practice in a more kind of cohesive and extensive way, and accelerating and mobilizing action on climate change and sustainability in communities to try and meet our 2030 objectives and beyond. And that's it from the ACT team and the SFU Climate Innovation World at SFU.